Silas Pruitt stood on the stockyard catwalk in Red River County with one boot on the rail and his hat tipped high enough for every bidder to see his smile. And he asked the crowd whether they planned to trust 1,180 head of longhorns to a woman who measured fence posts with a survey chain and counted feed sacks twice before breakfast. The laughter came quickly because Pruitt had money in 3 banks, grazing contracts north of the Canadian, and cousins in every auction ring between Sherman and Wichita. He spoke again before the laughter could fade, naming Ray Fisher in full, raising his voice so the man at the back could hear, and saying that a trail boss needed a hard hand, not a school ledger and not a widow's caution from northern winters that never reached Texas soil. Ray Fisher did not answer him from the ring. She stood by the gate with Elias Boone on her right and Tomas Ortega near the scales, and she waited until the bidder from the Abilene agent finished reading the shipment terms. The agent offered $34 per head on delivery at Abilene rail pens, with settlement against rail receipts and final count. Ray accepted in a clear voice, signed with full legal name, and set her palm over the signature until the ink stopped shining. Pruitt called down one last line saying she would return with half a herd and a story about bad luck. The men nearest him laughed again, because this time he made it sound like a wager they already won. The clerk asked whether she had the men to move a herd of 1,180 head over 960 miles at trail speed. Ray named 14 hands, 1 ramrod, 1 wrangler, and 1 point rider for each shift. And she named Boone first so every ear in the ring could place the seriousness of her intention. Boone had driven cattle north before the war and after it, and men in 3 territories trusted his weather sense. Pruitt leaned down over the rail and said Boone had gone sentimental with age. Ray folded the contract, placed it inside a waxed leather packet, and gave no line back to him. The silence made the mockery louder, which suited Pruitt for that morning and suited Ray for every day that came after. She walked from the auction ring to the livery yard, where her mare stood tied under cottonwoods, and checked every item in her trail inventory, because she had learned in another state that ridicule passed quickly, while arithmetic stayed. In her list stood 1,180 head, 14 hired hands at $30 per month per hand, 1 debt note of $8,400 maturing in September 1871, and an 80-day march if the herd held an average of 12 miles per day. The debt note sat under her name from a winter feed loan taken after an ice storm had stripped her county pasture. If she did not ship by rail from Abilene before the September maturity, interest rose and foreclosure followed. Ray had come to Red River County 5 years earlier from southern Colorado after her husband died in a barn collapse during a blue norther. She had kept one thing from that first life, a notebook of shelter measurements and weather observations copied from her father, who taught that land gave warning before it gave punishment. In Texas, she had learned cattle weight curves, creek recharge, and trail sickness in spring storms. And by 1871, she knew that men heard frontier knowledge only if it wore their own accent. Her knowledge did not. She did the work anyway. The herd gathered over 12 days. Boone selected remuda horses with broad chests for river work. Ortega bought salt by the sack and marked ration lines for men and animals. Will Cade, youngest hand at 19, cleaned carbines and rewrapped rifle stocks with rawhide in case of river spray. Caleb Dunn and Ira Bell, both older drovers with families in Fannin County, took night circle duty for the first week because they knew how to read a drifting herd by sound. By departure morning, Ray had 14 hired hands mounted and ready, plus herself at trail boss post. Pruitt rode out to the lane as they formed column and offered a parting line loud enough for teamsters loading flour wagons to hear. He said she had bought too much coffee, too much salt, too many spare shoes, and not enough luck to make Kansas. Ray told him one thing only with no raised voice. She said the grass line west of the main route had failed early, and his herd would stall if he entered Indian territory without alternate water notes. Pruitt tipped his hat as if receiving a sermon and answered that he would follow men, not paper. That exchange settled the last chance between them before the trail closed behind both outfits. The herd crossed the Red River at low stage in early May, entered Indian territory in warm rain, and moved north with steady daylight pushes. For 11 days, the drive held schedule. They averaged 12 miles per day across mixed grass and broken timber. Ray set watches in 3 rotations and kept strict quiet in the camp center after dark, because cattle took fear from men before they took it from wolves. Ortega counted every sub-herd at dawn and dusk with Boone verifying. Their books matched each evening. On the 12th night south of the Washita crossing, unknown riders struck from the east under new moon conditions. They fired low to startle stock, not to hold ground. The tactic worked. The center of the herd broke. 2 outer strings snapped fence rope, and the bedded line surged through camp before half the men had boots on. Caleb Dunn tried to turn a wedge of panicked steers away from the chuck wagon and was thrown beneath a horn bull in dark ground he could not see. Ira Bell reached for Dunn, lost his seat in the same crush, and took a hoof strike to the throat before Boone could clear a lane. Creed's men worked fast in the disorder. They split a block of cattle from the rear, drove them eastward, and left 3 spent horses in the brush line where they had switched mounts. By first light, the camp held 2 dead hands, 1 shattered wagon tongue, and frightened men who had listened all night to steers bawling from miles of broken country. Ray called roll. 9 hands quit before she finished speaking, each man taking his horse and owed wages through that morning. No gun was raised on them. No one was chased. Fear had become stronger than contract, and fear on open range killed more surely than mutiny ever did. The arithmetic after sunrise showed the cliff edge. Starting herd stood at 1,180 head. Raid night losses measured 146 head, missing in broken groups, which left 1,034 in hand if no further drift occurred. Crew strength stood at 3 men plus Ray, with Boone, Ortega, and Cade remaining under full risk for the remaining distance. The debt note due in September did not move. The miles to Abilene did not shrink because men were gone. Ray measured the alternative before any saddle turned north. Wintering over in Indian territory with 1,034 head would have required leased grass, extra guards, and purchased feed she did not have cash to secure, and the September note would still have matured while cattle stood idle. Foreclosure would have taken her county pasture before first frost. She chose movement over delay. That choice forced every remaining rider into double duty and forced the drive back onto schedule before noon of the same day. Ray set a new command structure before the sun reached mid-morning. Boone took permanent swing with authority to cut and rejoin the herd without prior signal when terrain narrowed. Ortega moved from wrangler into dual role, horse care at dawn and books at halt, because exact counts had become legal evidence as well as trail necessity. Cade shifted to point in daylight and night scout when moon permitted. Ray rode drag, then center, then point depending on weather and river conditions. She shortened meal halts to save daylight and redistributed ammunition to riders with the best night sight. The specific hesitation she resolved in that hour was command ambiguity, because with 10 men gone, a single delay in decision would have opened another break in the herd before noon. Once each roll had 1 owner and no overlap, movement became possible again under reduced manpower. They buried Caleb Dunn and Ira Bell on a rise above wash ground, marked both graves with mesquite posts burned at the top for visibility, and copied each location in Ortega's book for family record. Ray read the names aloud once. The crew mounted and moved north before heat built. Before camp struck, Ray and Ortega collected Dunn's pocket watch, Bell's Bible wrapped in oilcloth, and both men's pay tallies, then sealed the items in separate saddlebags marked for their families. She set aside the first death shares in the ledger margin, even before Abilene money existed in hand, because she intended those homes to be paid ahead of any equipment replacement. The deaths stopped being trail rumor in that moment and became an account she meant to settle in full. 3 days later, they found the first evidence that the raid had been theft and not random violence. A cluster of recovered strays came in from a draw after a rain. 4 steers carried fresh overbrands laid across older marks that still showed through scar tissue. Ortega sketched each altered mark in his ledger, listed horn shape and color pattern, and noted date and location. Boone cut those animals into a separate line tied by rope intervals, so no mixing could erase proof. Ray had been unable to name a raid leader at dawn. Those brands opened the path to identification. At the same draw, Boone found 2 First Light sign traces the raid had left behind, a distinctive crescent shoe print on one horse and a cut latigo strap, stamped with a supplier mark used by a known broker line tied to Jonah Creed. Ortega entered both details beside the overbrand sketches. The raiders had been unknown when the sun rose after the attack. Each recovered trace reduced that anonymity and moved the trail from grief toward evidence. Storm season reached them in June. One black squall near the South Canadian drove hail across the herd for 20 minutes and sent weak calves down in mud. Cade rode point through reduced visibility at less than 50 yards and kept led animals from turning back into flooded ground. Their pace dropped below 12 miles per day for 4 days, which threatened the September dead clock. Ray recovered schedule by pushing 2 long dawn starts on firm prairie after the storm cleared, gaining 9 miles above target over 3 days. Food and water management became precise enough for courtroom books. Ortega set coffee at fixed measure, cut flour rations by 1/10 after the raid, and balanced the reduction by increasing beans on alternate nights so strength held for riding shifts. Horse grain remained untouched because exhausted mounts destroyed the whole chain. Salt issue for cattle stayed constant to prevent drift toward random mineral patches. Every decision was written with quantity and date. Documentation had become another rider in camp, silent and unavoidable. Near the Cimarron crossing, they met a southbound freighter who carried news from 2 outfits ahead. Pruitt's herd had stalled west of the standard line after shallow wells went dry. He had pushed into sparse grass without reserve water notes and lost condition in his beeves while waiting for local guidance. The freighter said Pruitt sent riders back seeking mapped water points from any crew that had them. By noon, a messenger from Pruitt found Ray at a cottonwood bend and asked, without ceremony, whether she would sell copies of her trail water notes. Ray named no insult from the auction ring. She named a price, $100 in coin or draft, and one condition, that Pruitt's men would share any fresh raid sign they encountered. The messenger agreed and rode south with Ortega's duplicated map pages sealed in oilskin. 2 days later, a return rider delivered payment and reported that Pruitt had shifted route to the mapped springs and restarted his northbound line. The exchange stripped social authority from Pruitt in practical terms, because the man who mocked paper now required paper to move stock. Ray gained cash reserve for supplies and gained intelligence exchange that would matter later when altered brands surfaced again. Late June brought the river crossing that nearly broke the drive. The Arkansas ran high from upstream rain and carried timber debris in fast current. With 4 riders controlling over 1,000 head, any full panic at entry would have turned the herd into a floating wall and destroyed count integrity in a single hour. Ray tested depth by line and marked 2 entry points with willow poles. Boone took opposite bank position with a spare rope team. Cade pushed lead steers one at a time until the first 20 held heading. Midstream drift pulled 80 head toward a snag field. Boone cut in. Ortega swung downriver with a long line, and Ray rode into chest-deep current to turn the lead bull by horn and rein pressure. They saved the drifting block and lost no cattle in that crossing, but the effort cost time and horse strength. That night, they counted lame mounts, reset shoeing order, and agreed to a 6-hour sleep rotation rather than 4, so point judgment would not fail from fatigue. The obstacle resolved in that decision was route indecision, because after a crossing like that, many crews shifted east in search of easier banks and lost weeks in marsh country. Ray held the main northern line and accepted a harder immediate push, which preserved the arrival window for Abilene. Recovered strays continued to come in small groups through July. Weather, grazing drift, and pursuit riding returned 89 head in total over the weeks after the raid. Ortega tracked each recovery with date, location, and mark condition. Some returned clean. Others carried hurried overbrands and knife cuts around ear notches where thieves had tried to erase identity. By the time they crossed into Kansas approaches, final in-hand count stood at 1,123 head, exactly consistent with starting numbers minus raid loss plus recoveries. The books matched hoof count at sundown 3 nights running. One evening before Abilene, Ray stood beside her mare while the others slept and spoke into the horse's mane, so her voice would not carry to camp. She said the names Caleb Dunn and Ira Bell, said both families would be paid before any new saddle was bought, and said September would not take her land if she reached rail pens by July. She said she was tired enough to miscount fence posts in her sleep. She tightened the mare's cinch by hand, checked the north wind once, and returned to the fire without another word. Abilene appeared in late July as rail smoke first, then grain elevators, then the long noise of stock pens where trail dust met commerce. The town in 1871 held the rough order of a place growing faster than its streets. Rail agents weighed cattle in sequence, clerks wrote receiving tickets, and buyers inspected horns, backs, and hooves for condition. Ray brought 1,123 head to contracted pens, submitted her drive book, and requested immediate tally against contract price at $34 per head. Gross value on delivered count stood at $38,182 before debts and expenses. The dispute opened inside the rail pens within an hour. A buyer from a secondary lot complained that several steers in a neighboring consignment carried overbrands matching sketches in Ray's ledger. Pike, Deputy Marshal Harlan Pike, arrived with 2 rail guards and asked for every receiving ticket tied to those marks. Ray laid Ortega's book on a feed crate, opened to the first post-raid entries, and identified scar patterns, horn angles, and cut ear lines that matched the suspect animals. Pike had lacked a named perpetrator for trail thefts entering Abilene. Ray's documentation resolved that hesitation by converting rumor into records with dates, distances, and witnesses. Seizure followed procedure. Pike directed rail agents to hold suspect lots pending sworn statements. Receiving records showed those cattle had arrived under buyers linked to a middle broker who had recently dealt with Jonah Creed's associates. Ray gave a sworn statement in August 1871 before county authority, naming the raid location, casualties, altered marks, and the chain of movement into Kansas markets. Boone and Ortega testified to counts and recoveries. Cade identified one horse with a split left ear that had been left at the raid site and later seen with a Creed-linked rider near Dodge transfer yards. Pike added the first light raid traces to the same chain, the crescent shoe print description, the cut latigo strap supplier mark, and the abandoned mounts found after the attack. Then matched those details against seizure records and broker purchases tied to Creed's line. Unknown raiders from dawn became identifiable actors inside one file. The case no longer relied on campfire memory. It rested on marks carried from the raid ground to the rail pen. Pike used that record to issue holds and coordinate with Kansas officers already tracking Creed on separate theft complaints. Creed was arrested in Kansas within weeks, and Ray identified him in person as the man she had seen at distance during the raid break, recognized by a scar crossing his right cheek and by saddle gear taken from a dead rider near the wash. The case ran through a simplified frontier process, uneven in many respects, yet sufficient to tie stolen brands to seizure records and to remove Creed from trail operations before winter. The money settlement at Abilene landed with less drama than the auction mockery months earlier, which suited Ray. Contract payment on 1,123 head at $34 per head produced $38,182 gross. She paid the $8,400 debt note before September maturity, took stamp receipt, and placed it with her contract packet. The obstacle of imminent foreclosure was resolved in that single transaction, which opened freedom to make choices not dictated by panic. She used that freedom first on wages and death shares. Trail wages promised had been $30 per month per hand. The drive duration from May departure to late July delivery covered roughly 3 months of active trail pay. Ray paid full 3-month wages to each of the 14 hired hands, including the 9 who quit after the raid, which set each hand at $90. She sent payment through known ranch posts where necessary and recorded each receipt. For Caleb Dunn and Ira Bell, she paid owed wages plus death shares to their families, adding an extra month at the same $30 rate to each family packet, making $120 to each household. She included the grave locations copied from Ortega's book and signed both letters herself. Each death packet carried the personal effects taken from camp after the raid, Dunn's watch in one wrapping, and Bell's Bible in another, with a line from Ray stating the exact hour those items were inventoried on trail. The consequences of the raid did not end in a Kansas arrest. They reached kitchen tables in Fannin County, where families opened those bundles and understood that the men had not been reduced to numbers in a ledger. Boone objected once, quietly, saying men who left at dawn did not earn full-run pay. Ray answered that fear on raid morning had already taken enough from that crew, and she would not let wage disputes define the dead. She did not ask any man for apology before payment. She did not ask any family for gratitude before mailing shares. That decision traveled south through ranch lines faster than any court notice in Kansas. Pruitt reached Abilene 2 weeks after Ray, with a herd reduced by stalled grazing and delayed arrival penalties. He came to her shipping yard near sunset, hat in both hands, and asked for a private word where no auction crowd could turn the moment into theater. Ray met him beside a stack of tied hay bales while Boone and Ortega kept distance. Pruitt said he had mocked her in Red River County, borrowed her water notes when his own judgment failed, and watched those notes keep his herd moving when wells west of the line ran dry. He said he had been wrong in public and would say so in public. The next morning at the same stockyard office where spring laughter had started, Pruitt addressed a small line of buyers and drovers and named Ray Fisher as competent trail boss whose books, water maps, and discipline had saved his own season from full ruin. He did not call her lucky. He did not qualify the statement with his status. The social hierarchy in that room shifted by inches, enough to be felt. Ray acknowledged him with a nod and returned to reviewing freight charges. No reconciliation speech followed. Respect moved through the only channel the frontier trusted, repeated evidence. Deputy Marshal Pike filed his testimony package on brand fraud with rail receiving records attached and sent certified copies to relevant county points. In that file stood Ray's statement, Ortega's tally pages, and receiving ticket numbers from seized lots. Pike later wrote that without those records, the case against Creed would have remained accusation without chain. Frontier justice often failed where memory replaced measurement. This case held because measurement had ridden with the herd from the first recovery day. Autumn 1871 brought one final decision that settled the moral account of the drive. Ray hired two widows' sons for the next season, one from Dunn's household and one from Bell's, both old enough to ride swing and eager for paid work that stayed near known crews. She did not frame the hire as charity. She listed wages at the standard $30 per month per hand and assigned Boone to train both in night watch procedure and river spacing. The obstacle resolved there was family precarity after Ray's death, and the practical result was income continuity in households that had lost a wage earner. Through winter and into the following spring, Ray built an independent shipping operation in Abilene. Rather than returning full-time to Red River County, she leased pen space near rail loading points, contracted seasonal drives from smaller owners who lacked organized crews, and required every hired hand to train on brand recording and water notation before departure. Her office held one wall map of the 960-mile route, with river stages marked by month, and one locked chest for contracts and sworn copies. Ortega became her bookman in formal capacity, managing tallies, payments, and correspondence. Cade, now tested in Storm River and Raid, was promoted to point rider for the 1872 season. Boone remained ramrod, still blunt, still loyal, and still first to smell weather trouble before sunrise. The story of the 1871 drive persisted because every critical number stayed fixed under scrutiny. Starting herd counted 1,180 head. Raid night loss counted 146. Recoveries over distance counted 89. Final delivered stood at 1,123 head. Initial hired crew stood at 14 hands. Remaining active crew after raid stood at 3 men plus Ray. Distance covered held at 960 miles. Average pace held near 12 miles per day once storm losses were absorbed and recovered. Contract price remained $34 per head. Trail wages remained $30 per month per hand. Debt note remained $8,400. Due September and marked paid before maturity, Ray did not keep a speech about vindication. She kept records, payroll receipts, grave coordinates, and route notes revised by weather year. Men who had laughed in spring sent inquiries in winter about hiring terms for northbound lots. Families who had buried their dead kept the letters with enclosed maps and payments, and they repeated one line to neighbors, that Ray Fisher had paid without bargaining against grief. Pike kept his file. Pruitt kept his public admission. The frontier kept the rest in memory shaped by outcomes no argument could erase. Years later, when Abilene traffic shifted and new railheads drew drives westward, Ray's procedures traveled with former hands into other yards and counties. Brand sketches in pencil became common attachments to receiving books. Water note exchanges gained price and formality. Night watch assignments after raids hardened into written rotation rather than spoken habit. These changes did not remove danger from the trail. They reduced avoidable losses where discipline could stand in for missing institutions. The title of that season never belonged to a courtroom and never belonged to auction laughter. It belonged to miles under pressure, arithmetic under grief, and generosity under earned authority. Ray had driven cattle north from Texas with 3 men left after a raid, and she had reached Abilene with 1,123 head delivered, a debt retired, a thief identified, and 2 dead hands named in full. She had been dismissed in public before departure. She answered in records and labor. When the season closed, she had paid every promised wage, sent death shares to both families, and hired the next generation from those same homes. In the final ledger for that year, Ortega wrote one plain line under the last settlement entry, using the same careful script he used for rations and river depths. He wrote that competence had entered town in dust and left it in ink. Ray reviewed the page, corrected one spelling, and closed the book. The work resumed at first light, because frontier legitimacy was never granted once for all time. It was maintained season by season, head by head, and mile by mile.